The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, somewhere over the mountains of northern Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Kestrel Viper Thorne adjusted her night vision goggles and scanned the valley below, her AH-64D Apache longbow cutting through the thin mountain air like a predator stalking prey. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional muzzle flash that painted the rocks in brief, violent orange. "Overlord, this is Viper 17, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the situation unfolding beneath her rotors. "I have eyes on the target area, multiple heat signatures, approximately 2 clicks northeast of the LZ. The response came back immediately, tense and urgent. "Viper 17, be advised we have a SEAL team pinned down in Grid Square Tango 47. They've been taking heavy fire for the past 20 minutes. Mortar rounds incoming from an elevated position, bearing 090 degrees from their location." Kestrel's jaw tightened. SEALs didn't call for help unless the situation was beyond critical. Through her FLIR thermal imaging system, she could see the ghostly white figures of the Special Operations Team, pressed against rocky outcroppings, return fire sporadic and desperate. Every few seconds, a bright flash would appear on her screen, another mortar round impacting dangerously close to their position. "Roger, Overlord, I see them." She banked the Apache left, feeling the familiar weight of the aircraft respond to her touch. 23 years of flying military aircraft, from her first solo in a Huey to this moment, had prepared her for situations exactly like this. Viper 17 going hot, engaging enemy mortar position. What nobody in the command center knew, what none of the SEALs below could have guessed, was that Kestrel Thorne had been written off by half the pilots in her squadron. Too small, they said. Too quiet. Too precise when what you needed was overwhelming firepower and aggressive tactics. The call sign Viper hadn't been given out of respect, it had been mockery, a reference to her tendency to strike once, accurately, instead of unleashing hellfire like her male counterparts preferred. But precision was exactly what this moment demanded. The mortar nest was positioned on a narrow ledge, maybe 60 meters above the trapped SEAL team. Too close for conventional rockets without risking friendly fire. Too well protected for small arms fire from her co-pilot gunner. This required something different, something that demanded the kind of surgical accuracy that had made her instructors at Fort Rucker shake their heads in disbelief during advanced gunnery training. The Apache shuddered as she pushed it into an aggressive diving turn, the mortar position now filling her targeting display. Below, 8 American warriors waited for salvation that would come down to a single, perfect shot. Thunder Valley had claimed too many good soldiers already. Not today, not on her watch. The mountains held their breath as Viper 17 prepared to strike. The enemy mortar crew never heard the Apache coming. Kestrel had approached from the east, using the natural contours of the mountain range to mask her approach, flying so low that her landing skids nearly kissed the rocky peaks. The advanced navigation system painted green lines across her helmet-mounted display, but she was flying by instinct now, 23 years of muscle memory guiding her hands across the collective and cyclic controls. "Viper 17, this is Ground Team Alpha," came the voice through her headset, strained and professional despite the circumstances. "We count 3, possibly 4 enemy combatants on the elevated position. They've got us zeroed in. Every time we move, they drop steel on us." Chief Petty Officer Marcus Bulldog Rodriguez crouched behind a boulder that had been carved into Swiss cheese by small arms fire, his M4 carbine held ready. The rest of his 8-man SEAL team was spread across 40 meters of broken terrain, each man finding what cover he could in the unforgiving landscape. They'd been inserted 6 hours ago to gather intelligence on a high-value target, but the mission had gone sideways when a patrol stumbled across their observation post. "Copy Ground Team Alpha, I have visual on your position." Kestrel's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Stand by for close air support. Keep your heads down." Rodriguez had worked with Apache pilots before, Most of them were good, some were great, but they all had the same approach: overwhelming firepower. Hellfire missiles, 30 chain gun, rockets. The standard protocol was to turn the target area into a smoking crater and sort out the details later. But this voice was different. There was something in the tone, a confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Through his night vision scope, he watched the Apache appear like a ghost against the star field, rotors barely audible despite its proximity. The aircraft moved with an almost organic fluidity, as if it were hunting rather than simply flying. This wasn't the aggressive, straight-line approach he'd seen from other close air support missions. This was something else entirely. Kestrel's co-pilot gunner, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Tommy Rabbit Kowalski, scanned the target through his own thermal sight. Jesus, Viper, they're dug in good. Standard mortar pit, probably 80 tomb. Looks like they've got overhead cover too. I see it. Kestrel's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency. The targeting computer was already calculating range, wind speed, and trajectory, but she barely glanced at the numbers. This was about feel, about understanding how her aircraft would respond in the thin mountain air, about reading the thermal signatures that told the story of human movement and intention. The mortar position was a masterpiece of tactical placement. Whoever had chosen this spot understood military engineering. They had clear lines of sight to the valley floor, natural protection from above, and multiple escape routes. Taking it out with conventional munitions would require multiple passes, giving the enemy time to relocate or, worse, to target the Apache itself with shoulder-fired missiles. But Kestrel wasn't thinking conventionally. Rabbit, single 30 burst. I want you to put 10 rounds right into the center of their position. Not the edges, not suppressive fire. Center mass. Kowalski had flown with Viper for 18 months, and he'd learned to trust her judgment even when it didn't make immediate sense. Other pilots would have called for a full missile strike. She was asking for precision that bordered on the impossible. The night sky erupted in lethal accuracy as the Apache delivered its surgical strike. The 30 M230 chain gun spoke once, a brief stutter of mechanized death that lasted less than 2 seconds. 10 depleted uranium rounds, each weighing nearly 2 pounds, streaked through the darkness at nearly 3,000 feet per second. From Kestrel's perspective, the world slowed to crystalline clarity. She could see the muzzle flashes from the mortar position, could track the thermal bloom of human bodies against the cold mountain stone, could feel the slight vibration through her aircraft as the gun system cycled. The rounds impacted in a pattern so tight it might have been drawn with a compass. The mortar position simply ceased to exist. Where moments before there had been movement, heat signatures, and the regular thump of outgoing rounds, now there was only silence and settling dust visible through the thermal imaging system. Jesus Christ, whispered Chief Rodriguez into his radio, momentarily forgetting proper communication protocol. For 6 years of SEAL operations, he'd called in close air support from every type of aircraft in the inventory. He'd seen Warthog strafe Taliban positions with their massive GAU-8 cannons, watched Navy FA-18s drop precision-guided munitions from 30,000 feet, coordinated with Marine Cobra pilots who could put rockets through a window at 2 miles. But he'd never seen anything like what had just happened. Ground Team Alpha, this is Viper 17. Threat neutralized. You're clear to move. Kestrel banked the Apache into a lazy orbit around the valley, her eyes constantly scanning for additional threats. The FLIR system showed the SEAL team beginning to move, flowing across the terrain with the fluid efficiency that made them legendary. But her job wasn't finished. Intelligence reports suggested there might be additional enemy forces in the area, and SEALs on the ground were always her first priority until they reached the extraction point. Viper 17, Ground Team Alpha, Rodriguez's voice came back, professional composure restored. That was some impressive shooting. We're moving to secondary objective now. Request you maintain overwatch. Copy Ground Team Alpha. I'll be your guardian angel." From 3,000 feet above, Kestrel watched the green figures move through her night vision system. Each member of the team moved with purpose, covering sectors, communicating through hand signals that were invisible to her but clearly understood by everyone on the ground. This was the ballet of special operations, and she was privileged to witness it from her aerial perch. Rabbit was unusually quiet in the front seat. Finally, he keyed his intercom. "Boss, how the hell did you know that would work?" One burst. Kestrel smiled inside her helmet. "Because I spent 2 years in Iraq watching good soldiers die because pilots were too eager to prove how much firepower they could bring to bear. Sometimes the situation calls for a scalpel, not a sledgehammer." The truth was more complicated. The truth was that Kestrel Thorne had been underestimated her entire military career, had watched lesser pilots get promotions and choice assignments because they fit the traditional mold of what a military aviator should look like. She'd learned to be better than good, to be perfect when perfect was the only option. Below them, the SEAL team moved deeper into enemy territory, confident that their guardian angel would keep them safe. The secondary objective was a compound built into the mountainside, invisible from satellite imagery but clearly visible through Kestrel's advanced sensor suite. Intelligence suggested it was being used as a logistics hub for enemy operations throughout the region, and the SEAL team's mission was to gather photographic evidence and plant tracking devices that would allow follow-up strikes. Viper 17 were approaching the target building. Multiple structures, possible civilian presence. We need eyes on before we move in. Kestrel adjusted her flight path, bringing the Apache closer to the compound while maintaining enough altitude to avoid small arms fire. The thermal imaging revealed a complex picture. Several buildings arranged around a central courtyard, vehicle tracks leading to what appeared to be a covered parking area, and most importantly, human heat signatures moving in patterns that suggested military discipline rather than civilian activity. Ground Team Alpha, I count 12 to 15 individuals in the target area. Movement patterns suggest hostile intent. No indication of civilian presence, but I'm seeing what looks like weapons emplacements on the eastern perimeter. Chief Rodriguez processed the information quickly. 15 enemies was manageable for 8 SEALs, but weapons emplacements changed the tactical picture significantly. Fixed positions meant machine guns, possibly even anti-aircraft weapons that could threaten their air support. Viper 17, can you identify the type of weapons emplacements? Kestrel switched to high magnification thermal and slowly panned across the eastern side of the compound. The heat signatures were consistent with heavy weapons, probably Russian-made DSHK machine guns, possibly even Zu-23 anti-aircraft cannons. Either way, they represented a significant threat to both the ground team and her aircraft. Looks like heavy machine guns, possibly anti-air capability. I recommend alternate approach from the western slope. Copy, we're moving to western approach. What happened next would be analyzed in after-action reports for months afterward. The SEAL team was halfway across the western slope when the compound erupted in activity. Someone had spotted them, or perhaps detected the Apache's presence through thermal imaging of their own. Suddenly, the night lit up with muzzle flashes as automatic weapons fire raked the mountainside. "Contact, contact," Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio static. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. They've got us pinned down." Kestrel didn't hesitate. She rolled the Apache into an aggressive diving attack, bringing her weapons systems online even as enemy tracers began to streak past her cockpit. This wasn't the surgical precision of the mortar nest. This was close-quarters battle at its most intense, with American lives hanging in the balance. Ground Team Alpha, mark your position with IR strobes. I'm coming in hot. The compound below transformed into a deadly light show as the SEAL team activated their infrared markers. invisible to the naked eye but blazing like beacons through Kestrel's night vision system. She could see her friendlies now, pinned down behind sparse cover, taking accurate fire from at least 4 different positions. Time to show them what a Viper could really do. The next 60 seconds redefined close air support doctrine. Kestrel brought the Apache down to less than 500 feet, well within the engagement envelope of the heavy machine guns that were now tracking her aircraft with deadly intent. Green tracers streaked past her cockpit windows as she rolled into the first attack run, the aircraft shuddering under the stress of high-G maneuvers in the thin mountain air. Taking fire, Rabbit called out as 12.7 rounds sparked off their armored cockpit. They've got us bracketed. But Kestrel was already in the groove, her hands moving across the controls with the fluid precision of a concert pianist. The first weapon's emplacement disappeared under a precise burst from the chain gun. She pulled up sharply, executed a perfect wing-over, and rolled in on the second position before the enemy could adjust their aim. Viper 17, you're drawing heavy fire. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of concern that SEALs rarely allowed themselves to express. Break off if you need to. Negative, Ground Team Alpha, I'm not leaving you. The second gun position exploded in a shower of sparks and flame as 30mm rounds found their mark. But now the remaining emplacements had her range, and the Apache was taking serious hits. Warning lights began illuminating across her instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, engine temperature climbing, multiple system cautions that would have sent most pilots looking for the nearest landing zone. Kestrel ignored them all. The SEAL team was still pinned down, still taking fire from at least 2 remaining positions. Her aircraft was hurt, but it was still flying, still fighting. That's all that mattered. Rabbit, talk to me. What do you see? 2 more gun positions northeastern corner of the compound. They're dug in deep, natural rock cover. This is going to be tight. It was more than tight. It was nearly impossible. The remaining enemy positions were positioned so that attacking one would expose the Apache to devastating fire from the other. Classical military doctrine called for multiple aircraft, coordinated attacks, overwhelming firepower. But there was no time for doctrine. The SEAL team was running low on ammunition, and dawn was only 2 hours away. If they couldn't break contact soon, they'd be fighting in daylight against overwhelming odds. Kestrel made a decision that would either save 8 American lives or cost her everything. Rabbit, I'm going to put us right between those 2 positions. When I roll inverted, you're going to have about 3 seconds to engage both targets simultaneously. Boss, that's crazy. We'll be taking fire from both sides at point-blank range. Trust me. She pulled the Apache into a climbing turn, gaining altitude for what she knew would be the most dangerous maneuver of her career. At 1,000 feet above the compound, she rolled the aircraft inverted and dove straight down between the 2 enemy positions. The world turned upside down in a symphony of violence and precision that would be remembered in military aviation circles for decades to come. Inverted and diving at nearly 200 knots, Kestrel held the Apache in a controlled fall toward the compound below. Through her night vision system, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from both sides as the enemy gun positions opened fire simultaneously. Green tracers crossed beneath her aircraft in deadly geometric patterns, some passing so close that she could see individual rounds spinning through the darkness. 3 seconds, Rabbit, make them count. Chief Warrant Officer Kowalski had trained for moments like this, but training and reality were separated by an abyss of terror and adrenaline. With the aircraft inverted and diving, his targeting system was providing information that his brain struggled to process. But his hands moved with trained precision, selecting both targets on his weapon's display and triggering the chain gun in rapid succession. The M230 spoke twice, brief stutters of mechanized death that sent streams of depleted uranium toward both enemy positions. At this range, with this angle of attack, There was no margin for error. Miss, and the SEAL team would remain pinned down. Miss, and the Apache would fly directly into concentrated anti-aircraft fire with no room to maneuver. Kestrel didn't miss. Both gun positions erupted simultaneously, secondary explosions suggesting ammunition cook-offs, as 30mm rounds found stored ordnance. She pulled out of the dive at less than 200 feet, the G-forces pressing her deep into her ejection seat as the Apache groaned under structural stress that pushed it beyond design limitations. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," whispered Rodriguez from his position on the mountainside. The entire compound was now burning, enemy forces either dead or fleeing into the darkness. The sustained firefight that had pinned down his team for 20 minutes had been resolved in less than 90 seconds of the most aggressive close air support he'd ever witnessed. "Ground Team Alpha, this is Viper 17. Area is secure. You're cleared to complete your mission." But even as she transmitted the all-clear, Kestrel knew her aircraft was in serious trouble. The warning lights that had been merely cautionary were now flashing urgent red. Hydraulic fluid was streaming from multiple impact points, engine temperatures were climbing toward critical levels, and the flight controls were becoming increasingly heavy and unresponsive. "Boss," Rabbit's voice was tight with concern, "we need to get this bird on the ground. I'm showing multiple critical systems failures." After the SEALs complete their mission and reach the extraction point, it wasn't up for discussion. Kestrel had never left friendly forces without air support, and she wasn't going to start now, regardless of her aircraft's condition. She coaxed the wounded Apache into a defensive orbit around the compound, watching through her thermal sensors as the SEAL team moved efficiently through the burning buildings, gathering intelligence and planting tracking devices. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset. "Viper 17, Ground Team Alpha. Mission complete. We're moving to the extraction point." "Copy, Ground Team Alpha. I'll escort you home." But as she banked toward the landing zone, both pilots knew that getting home was going to require more than skill and determination. It was going to require a miracle. The flight back to the forward operating base should have taken 30 minutes. With multiple system failures and hydraulic fluid painting abstract patterns on her windscreen, it took nearly an hour of nursing a dying aircraft through mountain passes that had claimed dozens of aircraft over the years. Kestrel's hands ached from fighting increasingly unresponsive controls, and her fuel gauge showed numbers that made both pilots nervous. "Overlord, this is Viper 17, declaring emergency. Multiple system failures, estimated 10 minutes fuel remaining. Request priority landing and emergency equipment standing by." The response came immediately. "Viper 17, cleared direct to runway 27. Fire and rescue equipment is rolling. Medical standing by." But Kestrel wasn't thinking about medical attention or post-flight inspections. Her focus was entirely on the SEAL team, still 15 minutes out from their extraction point. In normal circumstances, another aircraft would have been scrambled to provide overwatch for the final phase of their mission. But circumstances weren't normal. She was the only air asset in the immediate area, and dawn was beginning to paint the eastern mountains in shades of gold and orange. "Ground Team Alpha, what's your status?" "Viper 17, we're 5 minutes from the LZ. All team members accounted for, mission successful." 5 minutes. She had enough fuel for maybe 7 minutes of flight time, and that was optimistic. Landing at the FOB would take 4 minutes from her current position. The mathematics were unforgiving, but the choice was simple. "Roger, Ground Team Alpha. Maintaining overwatch until you're safely extracted." "Negative, Viper 17. Rodriguez's voice carried new urgency. "We can hear your engines from here. That bird is hurt bad. Get yourself on the ground." "Ground Team Alpha, I don't abandon my people, ever." The words hung in the radio static like a promise, like an oath that transcended military protocol and touched something deeper. For the 8 SEALs moving through the pre-dawn darkness, it was a reminder that some bonds couldn't be quantified in regulations or measured in tactical doctrine. Chief Rodriguez keyed his radio one final time. "Copy, Viper 17. We won't forget this." Neither would anyone else who heard the radio transmission. Word of the night's events was already spreading through the forward operating base, carried by radio operators and intelligence analysts who had monitored the mission from beginning to end. The story was taking on mythical proportions even before the participants had returned to base. The extraction went flawlessly. 2 A-60 Black Hawks appeared on schedule, landed in perfect formation, and lifted off with the SEAL team exactly as planned. Only then did Kestrel turn her battered Apache toward home, coaxing the last few minutes of flight from engines that were more faith than function. She landed with fuel gauges reading 0 and warning lights that had progressed from urgent to critical. As the rotor blades wound down and ground crews swarmed around the aircraft, assessing damage that would keep it grounded for weeks, Kestrel finally allowed herself to breathe. The mission was over, her people were safe, everything else was just paperwork. The maintenance report would eventually list 47 separate bullet holes in the Apache's fuselage, complete hydraulic system failure, and engine damage that bordered on catastrophic. By all engineering standards, the aircraft should have fallen out of the sky 20 minutes before Kestrel managed to nurse it home. That it hadn't was a testament to both superior engineering and superior piloting. But that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, 8 American warriors were alive because someone had refused to abandon them, had refused to accept the limitations that others might have seen as insurmountable. The official after-action report would use clinical language to describe the night's events, but the unofficial story would become legend. In the pre-dawn darkness of a forward operating base in Afghanistan, a new chapter was being written in the annals of military aviation. It was a chapter about precision under pressure, about refusing to accept defeat, about the kind of leadership that inspired others to attempt the impossible. The debriefing began at 800 hours in a windowless room that smelled of burned coffee and exhaustion. Kestrel sat across from Lieutenant Colonel Marcus "Hammer" Davidson, the squadron commander whose weathered features spoke of 25 years in military aviation. Behind him, a digital recorder captured every word for the official report that would work its way up the chain of command to eventually reach Pentagon briefing rooms. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, walk me through the engagement sequence. Start with first contact." For the next 2 hours, Kestrel methodically reconstructed the night's events, her voice calm and professional despite the magnitude of what she was describing. Each tactical decision was explained, each weapon's employment justified, each maneuver broken down into the cold mathematics of airspeed, altitude, and angle of attack. But numbers couldn't capture the reality of what had happened. They couldn't describe the split-second decisions that had saved 8 lives, the intuitive understanding of aircraft performance that had allowed her to push a damaged helicopter far beyond its design limitations, or the kind of moral courage that had kept her in the fight when self-preservation suggested retreat. "The inverted diving attack on the final 2 gun positions," Davidson said, his pen poised over his notepad. "That's not standard doctrine. Where did that come from?" Kestrel considered her answer carefully. The honest response was that it had come from 23 years of being underestimated, of watching less capable pilots get recognition because they fit the expected image of a military aviator. It had come from a determination to be so skilled, so precise, so undeniably competent that no one could question her place in the cockpit. "Sir, the tactical situation required unconventional solutions. Standard attack profiles would have exposed the aircraft to coordinated fire from multiple positions. The inverted approach allowed simultaneous engagement of both targets while minimizing exposure time." Davidson nodded, but his eyes suggested he understood there was more to the story. The SEAL team commander specifically requested to speak with you after his debrief. Chief Rodriguez doesn't praise lightly. What Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez had actually said was that Lieutenant Commander Thorne had displayed the kind of tactical brilliance and personal courage that defined special operations aviation at its finest. He'd recommended her for the Distinguished Flying Cross and suggested that every close air support pilot in the theater should study her tactics. But awards and recognition were secondary concerns. The primary concern was that 8 American servicemen had returned safely to their families, that a critical intelligence operation had been completed successfully, and that enemy forces had been denied the use of a strategic logistics hub. "Sir, I was just doing my job." Davidson closed his notepad and leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant Commander, I've been flying military aircraft since before you were born. I've seen good pilots, great pilots, and a handful of pilots who transcended the normal boundaries of what we consider possible. What you did last night falls into that final category." The words carried weight because they came from someone who understood the difference between competence and excellence, between following doctrine and rewriting it in real time. But they also carried a burden, because excellence in military aviation was often measured in the lives saved and lost, in missions accomplished or failed. "There's going to be considerable attention focused on this operation," Davidson continued. "Media interest, congressional briefings, maybe even a visit from some very senior officials. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Kestrel had spent her entire career avoiding that kind of attention, preferring to let her performance speak quietly while others claimed credit for the successes. But last night had changed something fundamental. She demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be ignored, had saved lives in a manner that demanded recognition. "Yes, sir, I'm prepared." The rest of the debriefing covered technical details, ammunition expenditure, and recommendations for tactical improvements. But the real story had already been told, captured in the radio transmissions that were being analyzed by intelligence specialists, and the gun camera footage that would become required viewing at the Army Aviation Center. As Kestrel left the debriefing room, she found Chief Rodriguez waiting in the hallway, still wearing his combat gear from the previous night's mission. The conversation that followed lasted only a few minutes, but it would be remembered by both participants for the rest of their lives. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you personally. What you did out there, my team owes you everything." "Chief, you don't owe me anything. We're all on the same side." Rodriguez shook his head. "No, ma'am. What you did was special. I've worked with a lot of pilots and I've never seen anything like that. The way you handled that aircraft, the way you stayed with us even when your bird was falling apart. That's the kind of leadership that defines careers." He paused, searching for words that could adequately express what the SEAL team was feeling. "Ma'am, my guys asked me to tell you something. From now on, whenever we hear that call sign Viper, we're going to know we're in the best possible hands." The call sign that had started as mockery had become a symbol of excellence. The pilot who had been underestimated for years had proven that competence and courage mattered more than preconceptions. And in the process, she'd reminded everyone who witnessed her performance that true leadership wasn't about commanding respect. It was about earning it through actions that spoke louder than words. 3 days later, the story began to spread beyond military circles. A freelance journalist embedded with Special Operations Forces had been monitoring radio traffic during the mission, and his initial report captured the attention of editors who understood the significance of what had transpired. Within a week, major news outlets were running stories about the female Apache pilot who had single-handedly turned the tide of a desperate firefight. But the media attention brought complications that Kestrel hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, her name was being mentioned in Pentagon briefings and congressional hearings. Talk show hosts were debating the role of women in combat aviation, using her mission as evidence for various political positions that had nothing to do with military effectiveness. "This isn't what I wanted," she confided to Rabbit during one of their few quiet moments between interviews and formal ceremonies. "I just wanted to do my job." "Boss, sometimes doing your job changes everything else," he replied. "What you did out there, it's bigger than one mission. It's going to change how people think about what's possible." He was right, though neither of them fully understood the implications at the time. The tactical innovations that Kestrel had developed during the firefight were already being incorporated into training curricula at Fort Rucker. Her gun camera footage was being studied by aviation tacticians who recognized that she'd fundamentally altered the paradigm of close air support operations. More importantly, her performance had shattered assumptions about capability and leadership that had limited opportunities for generations of military aviators. The Pentagon was quietly conducting reviews of promotion boards and assignment policies, recognizing that exceptional talent had been overlooked because it didn't conform to traditional expectations. But for Kestrel, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. A package arrived at her quarters with no return address, containing a simple wooden plaque with an inscription that brought tears to her eyes. "To Viper, Guardian Angel, SEAL Team 7." It was signed by all 8 team members, each signature accompanied by a brief personal message of gratitude. Chief Rodriguez had added a postscript. "Ma'am, heroes are defined not by the battles they win, but by the people they refuse to abandon. Thank you for showing us what that looks like." The plaque found a place of honor in her quarters, next to photographs of her family and the various aircraft she'd flown over the years. But its significance extended beyond personal sentiment. It represented a fundamental shift in how she was perceived by the special operations community, from an unknown support asset to a trusted partner whose capabilities were spoken of in reverent terms. Word spread through the close-knit network of special operations forces with the efficiency of all truly important intelligence. SEALs talked to Rangers, Rangers talked to Special Forces, and soon every Tier 1 unit in the theater knew about the Apache pilot who'd rewritten the book on close air support. When new missions required helicopter support, requests began specifying Viper 17 by call sign. Mission planners who had never met Kestrel Thorne nonetheless knew her reputation and the unique capabilities she brought to complex operations. The transformation was remarkable and swift. In less than a month, she'd gone from being considered a competent but unremarkable pilot to being recognized as one of the finest combat aviators of her generation. 6 months after the mission that had changed everything, Kestrel found herself in an unusual position. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony had been conducted with full military honors, attended by senior officials who spoke about courage and innovation in the face of overwhelming odds. But the real recognition had come from her peers, from the pilots and aircrew who understood the technical excellence required to accomplish what she'd achieved. "Viper, you've got a visitor," Rabbit announced as he entered the squadron-ready room where she was reviewing intelligence briefings for the evening's missions. "Some Navy commander wants to talk with you." Commander Patricia Steele Morrison had flown FA-18 Super Hornets off aircraft carriers for 15 years, accumulating over 3,000 hours of combat flight time and a reputation as one of the Navy's most skilled aviators. She was also leading a Pentagon study group examining innovations in close air support tactics, and Kestrel's mission had become a central case study in their analysis. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, I've been studying your gun camera footage from the September engagement. What you accomplished that night represents a fundamental advancement in rotary wing close air support doctrine." They spent 2 hours discussing the technical aspects of the mission: the inverted diving attack, the precision gunnery that had eliminated multiple targets without friendly fire, the aircraft handling that had kept a critically damaged helicopter airborne long enough to complete the mission. But Morrison's real interest lay in understanding the decision-making process that had led to such unconventional solutions. The tactical situation you faced required thinking beyond established doctrine, Morrison observed. Where did that come from? It was the same question Davidson had asked months earlier, but Kestrel's answer had evolved with her understanding of what had actually occurred that night. Ma'am, I think it came from being in situations where conventional approaches weren't sufficient. When you're not naturally accepted in certain communities, you learn to be better than good enough. You learn to find solutions that others might not consider. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. The study group has been analyzing similar patterns across multiple services. Some of our most innovative tactical developments have come from aviators who were forced to prove themselves in ways that others weren't. Your mission has become a template for a new approach to close air support training. The implications were significant. Flight schools were incorporating Kestrel's tactics into their advanced curricula. Simulator scenarios based on her mission were being used to train pilots in precision gunnery and close-quarters air support. Most importantly, the selection criteria for elite aviation assignments were being reconsidered to emphasize tactical innovation alongside traditional measures of performance. Lieutenant Commander, I'm authorized to offer you a position with the study group. We're developing the next generation of close air support doctrine, and we need officers who understand that innovation sometimes requires abandoning conventional wisdom. It was the kind of career opportunity that most pilots could only dream of, a chance to shape the future of military aviation, to influence training and tactics that would save lives for decades to come. But it would also mean leaving operational flying, abandoning the cockpit for conference rooms and PowerPoint presentations. Kestrel's response came without hesitation. Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but my place is with operational units. There are still missions to fly, still people who need support. Morrison smiled. I thought you might say that. The offer stands if you ever change your mind. But even as she declined the Pentagon assignment, Kestrel understood that her role had evolved beyond simple mission execution. Young pilots were seeking her out for advice, asking about tactics and decision-making in high-stress situations. She'd become a mentor figure almost by accident, someone whose experience could guide the next generation of combat aviators. The responsibility was both humbling and inspiring. Every conversation with a junior pilot was an opportunity to pass along lessons learned in the crucible of